Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our last faculty meeting of the year, and congratulations on making it to the end of the semester once again. I've invited Assistant Dean Nick Russo to offer the invocation.
Let us pray. Does not wisdom call and understanding raise her voice? On the top of the heights along the road, at the crossroads she takes her stand. By the gates at the approaches of the city, in the entryways she cries aloud. Listen, for noble things I speak. My lips proclaim honest words. Mine are counsel and advice. Mine is strength, I am understanding. Therefore I prayed, and prudence was given to me. I pleaded, and the spirit of wisdom came to me. I preferred her to scepter and throne, and deemed riches nothing in comparison to her. Nor did I liken any priceless gem to her. Sincerely I learned about her, and ungrudgingly do I share. Her riches I do not hide away. Whatever is hidden or plain I learned, for wisdom the fashioner of all things taught me. Lord, transfigure our common work into a ministry to shed the light of wisdom. Through the knowledge we create and share, to comfort the oppressed and suffering, to heal the sick, to welcome the immigrant, to raise up the poor and marginalized, to bind the wounds of the world, to protect your creation, to cultivate beauty, to seek truth. For all these things we ask and pray and entreat in your great goodness, mercy, and wisdom, now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Thank you, Nick. That was beautiful. So as you all know, we are here today to celebrate the winner of this year's Sheedy Award, Ernesto Verdeja. The Sheedy Award was founded in 1970 in honor of Reverend Charles E. Sheedy, C.S.C., who served as dean of the college from 1951 to 1969. This award acknowledges a faculty member in the college who has sustained excellence in research and teaching over a wide range of courses. This individual must also motivate and enrich students using innovative and creative teaching methods and influence teaching and learning within the department, the college, and the university. Typically, last year's award winner would introduce this year's award winner, but last year's winner cannot be with us today. Therefore, I've invited a previous Sheedy Award winner to introduce this year's winner. Marisol Moreno is the Reverend John A. O'Brien Associate Professor of Latino-Latina Literature in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures. She was the 2016 Sheedy Award winner. Marisol?
Thank you, Sarah, and everyone for being here. What you don't really know is that I'm third in line to do this job today. Jessica couldn't be with us. She's okay, but she's not here any longer. Isaka Joshua is also out of town, so I was the third choice. So you're stuck with me for a little bit, not too long though. It is a great pleasure and honor to introduce to you this year's recipient of the Sheedy Excellence in Teaching Award, Dr. Ernesto Verdeja. This award, which I still have a hard time pronouncing, is bestowed upon an outstanding College of Arts and Letters faculty member who has displayed excellence in research and instruction and who motivates and enriches students. Here at Notre Dame, we are so lucky to be surrounded by many amazing colleagues who day in and day out put their hearts and souls into their teaching. Today, we gather to celebrate the accomplishments of a colleague who truly stands out from the rest. For those of you who don't know him, Ernesto Verdeja holds a joint appointment in the Department of Political Science and the John B. Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. His areas of expertise include a range of topics that are more relevant than ever before: human rights violations, genocide, the causes of violence, justice, forgiveness, and reconciliation. His first book, On Chopping a Tree, Reconciliation in the Aftermath of Political Violence, was published in 2009 by Temple University Press. He has also published numerous articles on these subjects, and in 2013, he published three co-edited essay volumes. In addition to all of these accomplishments, Ernesto is Director of Undergraduate Studies at the Kroc Institute, Faculty Fellow at the Kellogg and Nanovic Institutes, Faculty Affiliate at the Clow Center for Civil and Human Rights, and Executive Director of the Institute for the Study of Genocide in New York City. In addition to his many academic accomplishments, Ernesto's stellar teaching record is more proof of his passion and commitment to his field. As a teacher and mentor, he has touched the lives of many students, planting in them the seeds of a more just and peaceful world. One of his colleagues describes him as one of the most beloved and esteemed teachers at Kroc and Poli-Sci in both undergraduate and graduate levels, and as someone who has a following of students who see in him not only a superb teacher, but also a mentor and role model. What's the secret? We may be asking ourselves. According to another colleague, his success as an instructor and advisor comes from a confidence that he can actually affect students' intellectual and moral development. In other words, Ernesto's teaching exemplifies the power hidden behind our university's motto, educating minds and hearts. His students have nothing but praising comments about him. Let me share a few. Professor Verdeja has been the best and most influential professor I have had the privilege of studying under during my time at Notre Dame. From the minute we began our first class session, I knew that my entire belief system relating to human rights was about to change. Overall, Professor Verdeja is simply one of the best professors at Notre Dame. He has truly inspired in me a genuine passion for my learning, a confidence in my ability to think for myself, and a desire to make the world a better place. Although I could keep going, citing his students, I'd rather let him share a few words of wisdom with us today. But before that, I want to thank Ernesto for everything he does for his students, colleagues, university, and the world, and for being such an inspiration. Please join me in welcoming Ernesto Verdeja.
Well, thank you. It's interesting hearing all of that said out loud. It's strange to hear the students say those things, but it's also very humbling, of course. Dear friends and colleagues, it's an immense pleasure to be here today, an immense honor, in fact, to be recognized for teaching in the College of Arts and Letters. To be honest, I was surprised, frankly shocked, to receive this award. As I look around the room, I see many faces of wonderful and inspirational teachers who are equally deserving, and I'm keenly aware of the passion for teaching our students that we all share. It makes this recognition all the more humbling. And I've indeed learned a great deal from many of you here. I must confess that in my early days at Notre Dame, my teaching style, such as it was perhaps a bit too East Coast, a tad too forceful and direct, which tended to shut down class discussion rather quickly. But I will not forget the practical advice on adjusting to my new environment that I received from a number of friends, including George Lopez, Scott Appleby, who I saw over there somewhere, Catherine Zuckert, Michael Zuckert, and of course the ever-helpful Kevin Barry. Over the years, I've taught courses on topics that I'm passionate about: peace, reconciliation, and political violence, interests that are a product of my own upbringing. My parents were political refugees from Cuba, and although I was born in the United States, I spent my formative years abroad in Argentina and Venezuela during a period when Latin America was in turmoil as it confronted legacies of violence, repression, and inequality, as of course much of the region still does. Having immigrant parents and living in South America deeply shaped my own understandings of identity and belonging, and catalyzed a lifelong interest in questions of political reconciliation, justice, and peace building. And so I feel especially fortunate that I can teach about these topics for a living. But I also see it as a responsibility. For many of us, we make our biggest impact in the classroom, semester after semester, year after year, and thus we are enjoined to think carefully about how and what we teach. Now, having said all of that, I must confess that I don't have a unique teaching method with particular guidelines or strategies that are solely mine, so I don't really have much wisdom to impart on that front. My approach is broadly Socratic. I listen to students, I take them seriously, but I also ask them questions that challenge their assumptions and presuppositions, all the while underscoring the importance of respectful disagreement. And I've found that this is most successful if one establishes a space for discussion and dialogue, so even those who are shy can feel like they have something to contribute. Indeed, I see teaching as a way to encourage the development of moral reflection, to cultivate an awareness of the needs of others, and to engender a commitment to work to make the world a better place. In many ways, these are values at the center of democratic citizenship, for no political society can survive if its members care only about themselves and dismiss the needs of the most vulnerable among us. Now, I realize, of course, that a substantial number of students will take only one class in political science or in peace studies, and that their primary interests may lie elsewhere. But I'm fine with this. If I can kindle some concern for the issues that are passionate to me, and if I can get them to think about how to respond to some of the gravest problems we face, and that they and their children will continue to face, then I feel like I've made at least a small contribution to this idea of democratic citizenship, to promoting the idea that the privileges that come with being a member of a political community also come with serious responsibilities. And that these responsibilities do not end at our national borders. Moral decency and respect for the dignity of others, whether founded on deep religious convictions or secular humanist principles, require of us all to care for those among us in most need. So what does this all mean in practice? I've reflected on this quite a bit, and here I'll take the example of a course I've taught at the undergraduate and graduate levels for some time now on contemporary genocide and mass atrocity, which is also at the center of my research and my practical interests in human rights advocacy. I was invited to think about this a couple of years ago for an edited book on teaching about mass violence. People read those books. It's a thing. That was a joke. Tough crowd. Okay. But I'm going to take the opportunity here to elaborate further some of my thoughts on this. So let's begin with this question. What would it mean to teach successfully about genocide? There are some obvious criteria one can identify. For instance, one can focus on ensuring that students learn the basic facts of particular cases, the historical origins of discrimination and dehumanization, the role of hate propaganda, the names and actions of perpetrator organizations, the institutionalization of political and everyday forms of violence that accrue over time, as well as examples of resistance and also tender humanity. One can and should also teach a broad range of analytical approaches and show students the causal factors, the prior conditions, the tipping points, and the like that inform contemporary research. And certainly one may wish to introduce students to the variety of theories and practical strategies that have emerged to prevent future genocides. All of this is valuable, no doubt. And any instructor who can communicate this in a sophisticated and clear way is certainly successful. I refer to all of this as generally explanatory work. It concerns explanations of what has happened, where and when it happened, why it occurred, who were the main actors, and how it all occurred. And now, explanations are important, but they provide us only with one analytical perspective on genocide. Genocide can be explained to various degrees, using a host of social, scientific, legal, and policy methods. But understanding genocide is another matter, as it raises profound questions that are not easily resolved. And in my experience as an instructor, addressing the latter involves positing questions and searching for answers collectively in class. So by understanding, rather than explanation, I have in mind the ethical meaning and also consequences of genocide. How could this be? How could this have happened? Can one even make sense of this enormous catastrophe? Can explanation function as understanding and provide us with any deeper insight into what this all means? One cannot evade these questions in class. One cannot bracket them indefinitely because they continue to return, unwelcome guests who haunt one's conscience and demand answers. I raise these questions in class through various readings, and they provide some of the most challenging but also thoughtful discussions with my students. Now, explanation and understanding are not wholly separate, of course, for without adequate empirical explanations of genocide, we cannot grasp what is at stake in ethical terms, or even properly frame it. However, explanations do not exhaust the kinds of questions that my students continuously raise, a point well known, of course, to philosophers, theologians, artists, and others who grapple with these similar issues. So here, if you'll indulge me, and you will because I have the mic, what I'd like to do is just lay out a little bit some of the epistemological and ontological challenges to understanding, the way I framed it, that frequently emerge during the semester. The epistemological challenge posed by genocide asks whether any of our moral frameworks can make sense of the wholesale extermination of fellow human beings. In many natural law traditions, for instance, the cosmos is posited as morally intelligible. There is right and wrong. Harmful actions are not only violations of individual rights of others, but against the proper moral order of things. And there are many such formulations of natural law, monotheist, pantheist, naturalist, and so forth. But most point to some sense of correct ordering and intelligibility of the way things are and the way they ought to be. Genocide, however, challenges this in profound ways. The cognitive epistemic rupture in genocide, engendered by genocide, what happened, is also a moral epistemic rupture. How could this have happened? That fractures our very frameworks of moral intelligibility. It is no surprise that the problem of theodicy, which concerns how an all-good, all-knowing, and all-powerful God could allow evil, gained new relevance for Christians and Jews in the aftermath of the Holocaust, and of course drove many others away from religion. Indeed, some version of this problem, whether sacred or secularized, appears following any major catastrophe where our abilities of comprehension fail. Epistemologically, then, genocide leaves us morally unanchored, questioning whether we can make sense of these atrocities when our moral faculties and the foundations on which they rest seem inadequate. When the great philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote that in the 20th century we must think without a banister, she had this erosion of our moral certainties in mind. Now, to be sure, the Holocaust and genocide more generally are not solely responsible for these crises of meaning, but the crises always arise in the shadow of genocide. And these ruptures are also evident in many of the artistic works that directly take on genocide. Consider the paintings, for instance, of Anselm Kiefer or the poetry of Charlotte Delbo, to name only two artists, where the fundamental aporia between experience and presentation, that is the rupture in representation, stubbornly remains, resisting any attempt at full understanding and thus at closure. Hence Theodor Adorno's famous observation that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. These ruptures have been central to aesthetic encounters with the problem of genocide, a point that my students grasp when working through these challenging texts. And yet, as we discuss in class, the emphasis on rupture may carry its own danger. If art about genocide can point to the limits of representation and comprehension, that is, to understanding, focusing on rupture can also risk aestheticizing genocide to the point where it is portrayed as abject horror that remains inscrutable, uninterpretable, and thus outside of history. We risk returning, in other words, to interpretations of genocide as madness, as irrationality, and the like, and we may lose any way to interrogate it, leading to the abandonment of ethical critique. It is, after all, only a short step from declaring something uninterpretable to casting it aside as an aberration that need not challenge our beliefs, our values, or our convenient self-understandings of historical progress. And so this raises the second ontological challenge to understanding that we discuss in class. There's an enormous literature concerning what exactly is genocide, beyond the typical definitional debates among social scientists and lawyers. But when we ask what genocide is, we're asking about some of its fundamental elements beyond the observable and measurable features of social scientific analysis. Genocide is more than the aggregate of many killings, the processes by which an extermination policy coalesces, or the end result of human destruction. It is, as my students consistently point out, evil. But the specific elements of this are debated, as is the very concept of evil. One need only consider the differences between Leibniz and Voltaire on this issue. Is genocide evil because of its inherent cruelty, that is, the enormous and unjustifiable suffering it entails, or because it constitutes the rejection of coexistence and pluralism, a basic human norm? Is its evil rooted in social death and the obliteration of a meaningful shared life, or is it something else? There are certainly many more formulations about the evil of genocide, and even understandings of it, such as banality and radical, as excess, as irrationality, and so forth. And yet, as my students observe, any ontological inquiry poses a new danger, that is that of hypostasizing genocide and treating the concept as more real than its specific historical cases, separated from its context. Now, my point in class is less to adjudicate among these and other theoretical accounts, and instead underscore that any attempt to explore genocide's ontology will face, at some juncture, resistance to placing it neatly within the narrative of human affairs. Primo Levi tells the story of being denied by an Auschwitz guard an icicle to quench his thirst. When Levi asks the guard why, he is told, "Hier ist kein Warum," there is no why here. And so any examination of genocide must confront this absence of why at its center, even if many of its other features can be explained in the ways sketched earlier. This gap between explanation and understanding is not, however, a cause for despair. In fact, if I ended the talk right now, that would be really sad. But as I see it, it is not a cause for despair, but rather the catalyst for ethical practice. It encourages students to think about what it means to be responsible towards others, what it means to care for the most vulnerable and exposed among us, what it means to lend a voice and a hand to the work of justice, what it means to make the world a better place for our fellow human beings. Indeed, throughout my courses, whether on genocide or the foundations of human rights or the politics of transitional justice and reconciliation, we examine the ethical and practical responses to the profound challenges of modern-day injustices. In all of these instances, the goal is to combine intellectual integrity with moral awareness, to explore the ways in which we are all rooted in a shared world of mutual obligation. Teaching, in this sense, is a collective enterprise, one that unites sharp intellectual debate and critique with a knowledge of the ethical implications at stake. And I do have a sense that these discussions have an impact. I'm especially moved when I receive a card or a letter or an email from a former student noting how something from class has stuck with her. I've heard from students who have written to me several times over the years after they've graduated. I recall one student who told me about a class discussion on the politics of human rights that shaped her own thinking working in a human rights organization many years later. And another former student saying that what she learned about peace-building strategies has been directly relevant to her work building trust in communities torn by conflict. And of course, there are the many other students one has taught over the years who have gone on to have their own professional successes in numerous fields and have maintained, regardless of what they do for a living, a commitment to advancing justice and protecting rights in their own ways. And I've kept all these notes and cards, for they continue to inspire me in the classroom. They're reminders of the importance of what we do collectively as instructors and also as staff who contribute to the intellectual community here. And sometimes they even leave us in awe of what these young people go on to do. And so as I stand here and reflect about the purpose of teaching, I settle on the comforting thought that we can have some impact in the long run. And though the precise means by which this happens may seem intangible and hard to follow, through our students we can help contribute to a more humane, just, and decent future. Friends and colleagues, I'm so grateful to be here today. I'm very aware that I would not be here without your support and generosity, and I'm delighted to have an opportunity to share these moments with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernesto, for those inspiring words. I'm just so impressed to hear you talk about how you can teach about genocide in ways that are both thoughtful and challenging to the students, and that you are brave enough to enter into this topic with the students, and that you show them that we do ask the whys here. So thank you for your contributions to Notre Dame. And then I will say, right before I came to this meeting, I was looking at the first-year intent numbers. Those are among the first-year students, what they're intending to major in for next year, and political science is in the top spot right now, and that's, I'm sure, in part to having instructors like you in the department. So thank you for all that you do. Now, we always at this meeting give a gift to the recipient, and I believe we typically ask spouse or family member or people in the department for suggestions. And so I don't want to give away what it is, but I will say I was surprised that your wife suggested this knowing that she lives in the same house as you. And I will say that I also live with a family member who possesses one of these, and I was shocked. So please, without further ado.
Okay, so what do I do?
Open it.
Do I start? It's two.
Yes. Do the big one. Do the big one first.
Do the big one first.
Yes.
Okay. All right. There's a barcode.
Okay, my mistake. The small one first.
It's very. All right.
Come on, doesn't this add to the excitement?
It was sent to Brenda.
Keep on going. Can't stop now.
The bar doesn't open until 4:15, so really we're just Okay, come on, we gotta get this over. It would be anticlimactic at this point if I just said what it is. We need the big reveal.
Best board show ever.
It's a drum set.
I'm not kidding. That's what his wife said he wanted. My oldest son is a drum player, and in our previous house, we lived in a neighborhood where the houses were very close together. And if he didn't play for a few days, the neighbors would come around and say, "Well, how come James hasn't been playing the drums?"
So, yeah.
You might want to invest in some soundproofing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyway, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Please join us.
That's all you think about.